You wouldn't believe the kind of situation I ended up in just because I installed a smart lock on my own pool fence. Imagine handling your own business, upgrading your home's security, and suddenly the HOA Karen's son is calling 911 on you, accusing you of being the criminal. That's exactly what happened to me. And trust me, it turned into a conflict I never expected. It all began on a warm Saturday morning. My backyard pool had always been one of my favorite places to unwind, but lately it had become a constant problem. Kids from the neighborhood, including Karen's teenage son, had been sneaking in to use it without permission. I had caught them multiple times splashing around while I was at work or even late at night. I wasn't trying to be the bad guy. I just didn't want strangers putting themselves at risk in my pool, especially since I could be held responsible if anything went wrong. So I decided to replace the old fence lock with a smart lock that only I could control. It wasn't cheap, but I felt it was worth it for peace of mind. That morning, I had my tools laid out and was carefully installing the device when I noticed Karen's son hanging around near the fence. He was around 18, arrogant, and always gave me that smug look whenever I had confronted him before. "What are you doing?" he called out, arms crossed, acting like I was the one trespassing on my own property. "I'm installing a lock," I replied calmly. "The pool is off limits unless I say otherwise." He scowled, muttered something under his breath, and then stormed off. I didn't think much of it at the time, but less than 10 minutes later, I heard sirens. At first, I assumed it was just a coincidence, but when a police cruiser pulled up right in front of my driveway, my stomach dropped. 2 officers stepped out, and behind them came Karen's son, pointing at me as if he had just caught a criminal in the act. "That's him," he shouted. "He's locking us out of community property." I almost dropped my drill. "Excuse me?" I said, completely stunned. One of the officers approached and said, "Sir, we received a call about a dispute involving this pool fence. Can you explain what's going on?" Karen's son crossed his arms, a smug grin spreading across his face. I could already tell where this was going. He was trying to make me look like the bad guy for securing my own pool. And that was only the beginning. Standing there with the police in front of me, I couldn't believe the audacity of Karen's son. He stood back, smirking as if he had already won a fight I didn't even know I was in. The officer spoke calmly but firmly. "Sir, this young man is claiming you're installing a lock to block community access to this pool. Is that correct?" I nearly laughed at how absurd that sounded. "Officer," I explained, "this is my private pool. It's in my backyard behind my fence, and I pay for all of its upkeep. There is no community access. Only I and whoever I invite use it." Karen's son immediately jumped in. "That's not true. My mom said this pool is supposed to be shared. Everyone on the street knows it. He can't just lock it up." The entitlement in his voice made my blood boil. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had been raised believing rules didn't apply to him. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly unsure who to believe. I then pulled out my property documents papers I had printed weeks earlier, because when you deal with an HOA, especially someone like Karen, you learn to stay prepared. I handed them over. "You'll see here, the pool is part of my property. It's not listed as any communal area. This isn't even something the HOA manages." One of the officers flipped through the pages, nodded, and handed them back. "Looks pretty clear to me," he said. But just as I was about to relax, Karen herself came storming out of her house, her voice cutting across the street like nails on a chalkboard. "Officer, officer, you need to stop him," she shouted. "He's installing some strange electronic lock to keep us out. That pool has always been meant for the neighborhood." She marched right up to my fence, pointing her finger directly in my face. The officers raised their hands, trying to calm the situation. But Karen wasn't backing down. She started ranting about how community spirit meant everyone should have access to what she called shared spaces. That was it. I finally snapped. "Karen, this is my yard, my pool, and my fence. Your son has been trespassing for weeks. That's why I'm installing this lock to keep him and anyone else from breaking in again." The officers shifted uneasily. It was clear they knew I wasn't in the wrong, but Karen's behavior had turned the situation into a scene they couldn't just ignore. And the worst part? This was only making her more determined. Karen wasn't the kind of person to back down once she had an audience. With the officer standing there, she doubled down on her act. She pointed at the smart lock I had partially installed and nearly screamed. "See? He's turning this into some kind of fortress. He knows he's guilty. Otherwise, why would he be hiding access from everyone?" One of the officers sighed, clearly already tired. Ma'am, as far as we can see, this pool and the fence around it are on his property. Unless you can provide proof otherwise, there's nothing illegal about installing a lock. Karen's son quickly jumped in. But what about safety? What if a kid gets trapped in there? This is a danger to the neighborhood. The irony almost made me laugh. They were the ones sneaking in, and now they were suddenly concerned about safety. Still, I stayed calm, even though my fists tightened with every word. The real danger, I said firmly, comes from kids trespassing on my property. If they stay out, there's no risk. Karen huffed, her face flushed red. You'll be hearing from the HOA about this. You can't just make changes that affect the community. At that point, the officer raised an eyebrow. Is the HOA actually responsible for this property? Karen hesitated, stumbling over her words. She didn't have a clear answer. She knew just as well as I did that the HOA didn't have authority over my backyard. Still, she tried to twist the situation, going on about community trust and shared expectations. Eventually, the officers decided to wrap things up. Sir, one of them said to me, you're within your rights, but I'd recommend documenting any future incidents, especially if there's trespassing. It'll help if this continues. Karen shot me a look full of anger, like she wanted to burn a hole through me. Her son muttered something under his breath, but the smug confidence he had earlier was completely gone. They both walked back toward their house, but I could feel. This wasn't over. Not even close. Once the patrol car drove off, I finished installing the lock and tested it twice. The soft electronic click as it secured gave me a small sense of victory, but also a warning. I knew Karen. She wasn't going to let this go easily after being embarrassed in front of the police. Sure enough, later that night, I noticed a shadow moving near the fence. The motion sensor lights flicked on, revealing Karen's son tugging at the gate like he had every right to be there. When it didn't open, he kicked it hard, then pulled out his phone. That's when I realized he was calling 911 again. The moment I saw him dialing at the gate, I knew things were about to escalate. He shouted into the phone like he was reporting a serious crime. Yeah, he locked the pool again. He's holding community property hostage. Send someone right now. His voice echoed across the street loud enough for neighbors to hear. By the time the police arrived, I was already waiting by the fence, phone in hand, recording everything. This time, I wasn't going to let Karen or her son twist the story. The same two officers stepped out of the cruiser, and from their expressions, I could tell they weren't happy to be back. Karen came storming out again, her robe flapping behind her, already in full meltdown mode. Officers, arrest him! He's tampering with property that doesn't belong to him. I calmly raised my phone. Before you listen to her, you should see this. I played the footage I had recorded her son trespassing, kicking the gate, and then making that exaggerated call to 911. The officers watched quietly, their expressions tightening as the truth became clear. One of them turned to Karen's son. Is this you in the video? He shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, but no buts, the officer interrupted. That's trespassing and property damage. Karen exploded. He's just a kid. You can't charge him for wanting to use what belongs to the neighborhood. The officer didn't budge. Ma'am, this is clearly private property. You've already been told that. If either of you steps onto this property again without permission, you can and will face charges. For the first time, Karen went completely silent. Her face twisted with anger, but even she knew pushing further would only make things worse. Her son stood there, sulking, glaring at me like I had ruined everything for him, but the smug attitude he once had was completely gone. After giving their final warning, the officers left. I turned to Karen and her son, keeping my voice steady and firm. This ends now. If you step onto my property one more time, I'll have you arrested. This is your final warning. Without another word, they turned and stomped back toward their house. I finished locking the gate, the smart lock glowing softly in the dark. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt a sense of peace. Karen never apologized. She likely never would, but after that night, her son never showed up at my fence again. The lock did its job, and the police warning sealed everything in place. In the end, it took one smart lock, a bit of patience, and the truth on my side to finally put an end to it all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.